Hey there, listener. I am not Peter Bell. This is Melvin Brunson, creator and host of Cinematic Doctrine, a mature, millennial-infused film TV discussion podcast influenced by Acts 17 and Romans 2:4. While listening to Sons of Patriarchy, I knew I wanted to invite Peter to be on an episode of my show. What I didn't expect was his offer to cross-post the episode onto the Sons of Patriarchy feed as well. So, thank you, Peter. We're a comparably smaller podcast than Sons of Patriarchy, so giving us some airtime in your feed is greatly appreciated. And don't worry, listener, this discussion is more than adjacent to what Sons of Patriarchy is covering. Welcome to Leith is a documentary about a small, simple town upended by a notorious neo-Nazi. He purchases multiple properties intending to give them to his racist friends so they can have a controlling vote in Leith's local government, as Leith only has a combined population of 24. As Sons of Patriarchy has taken to task Christian nationalism, and the Wilsons' attempt to turn Moscow, Idaho into a Christian nationalist utopia, let alone the United States, I couldn't stop thinking of this documentary, which is why I invited Peter in the first place. The similarities between these two stories are uncanny, but I'll let the episode speak for itself. As stated, Cinematic Doctrine is still a modest project, so if you enjoy what you hear, why not jump over to our feed and listen to our episodes? We're on Spotify, iTunes, basically wherever. Here's 3 I recommend. There's The Stefford Wives with Kelsey Kramer McGinnis, The Assistant with Sheila Gregoire, or the BBC miniseries of Pride and Prejudice with Marissa Burt. All 3 of these episodes are in the spirit of Sons of Patriarchy, so give them a listen. Again, thanks Peter for joining me on this episode and for sharing this episode on the Sons of Patriarchy feed. And thank you, listener, for tuning in. I hope you enjoy it. You're listening to Cinematic Doctrine. Hey, if you just press play, you're missing out on 29... why am I saying the exact... It's 30 minutes, right? Like, it is basically 30 minutes of a bonus discussion exclusive for Patreon supporters. This discussion is with Peter Bell from Sons of Patriarchy. We are discussing... basically on his show, as he's interviewing survivors of church abuse or just general abuse of authority, he is having a mix of Christian voices and non-Christian voices. And part of the ethic of the show is to point out where these abuses have happened in Christian institutions. And there's people who criticize that because they primarily, when it comes to Christian pursuits of truth, they say, well, you need to only be asking Christians and so on and so forth. And they have plenty of reasons for why they say that. I'm not saying they're good. They just do it. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to ask Peter about how he processes that as someone who has had countless interviews with a mix of all kinds of people. And then as he's processed through it. So that discussion is exclusive to Patreon supporters. So for $3 a month, you get access to that discussion, as well as probably over 100 episodes now of extra discussions that are at the beginning of every episode. So you press play, it's already something new to your ears. Otherwise, keep on listening. You'll hear about other benefits to supporting on the Patreon, because there's other cool stuff too. But I digress. We are here to do a discussion on the documentary Welcome to Leith from 2015. The movie discussions are super simple. We basically do 5 broad conversational questions to get into, 2 of which are non-spoiler specific stuff. The other 3 are spoilers. So if you find yourself compelled by our discussion, you can check it out. It's on Tubi right now. Or if you don't care, or you have seen it, stick around, because we're going to get into more stuff too. But first, as is tradition, whenever I have guests on, I like to just hear from them and hear what they're doing and ask a couple questions. But to kick things off, Peter Bell, what is going on?
It's going good. I'm happy to be on this podcast with you, Melvin, and talking about a movie I had never heard of before you you brought it up to me, and you asked me for my movies, and I gave you baseball and a few other movies because that's all I know.
Barbie.
Yeah, and Barbie. That's right. Barbie's the one I gave you.
Which actually would have been pretty fun.
That would have been. It would have been like there's some crossover there too, which is funny. But yeah, it's a different, more lighthearted conversation than I'm used to, which is a nice turn.
I like that you said lighthearted, and it's like if someone has seen this movie, there's like a very dreadful undertone to the material, which we'll get into. But I also still feel it definitely connects with a lot of what you're doing right now. So right now you're producing, writing, editing, and the current host of Sons of Patriarchy. Congratulations on finishing season one.
Appreciate
I know
it.
you're still releasing, but I am the official umbrella of season one is over. That's pretty great. And I was curious, now that season one has ended, how would you pitch the show to new listeners as they await more of Sons of Patriarchy? And then also, what are you kind of hoping from this season listeners will get from it?
There are so many different ways I can go with it, but one is, if you look at our current political, cultural landscape and you want to figure out how did we get here, that is one big avenue that I did not expect this series to cover initially, but it sort of kind of does. So there's that, but it's also, if you've been hurt by the church, if you know somebody who's been hurt by the church, whether that be specific to the Reformed Church or broader evangelicalism, and you want to figure out why do people do this to others in the church, what are the undergirding theological or cultural or political or socioeconomical, and anything you could possibly think of, what are the undergirding things that people believe that allow themselves to cover up or to hurt other people in the church? Those are the things that we talk about.
And then I was when I was like kind of doing as I do, scouring the internet, looking for things to ask and explore. I saw you had an interview with Nadia Willems on Current Pub. This was October 18th.
Yep.
And after you were being asked about like where you stand theologically, I thought it was an interesting response. You said confessionally reformed but frustrated. So I was curious where those frustrations were born out of. Like, were they from observing church abuse, or maybe just a misappropriation or misapplication of theology? Like, what do you think?
Yes, to everything you had just said.
Got it.
Yeah, and also how this theology has been utilized and weaponized against people who have not been trained to the degree that I have, and others have been, who've been seminary trained and who have advanced degrees and whatnot, and utilize that against others who are kind of less fortunate than ourselves, or who don't look like me, or don't sound like me, or don't come from the
Mhm.
same background that I do. That's the frustrating part, where I do sign on to pretty much everything that confessional reform people sign on to, and it's the way it's weaponized that I'm frustrated with, that I'm not happy with, and that's what I want to see change.
So the last kind of general question I had before we just see where people can look forward to season two and all that jazz
Sure.
was, and I'm not going to put words into Sarah's mouth by any means, but I saw that your partner Sarah Bader, who manages the various social media channels, was quoted saying with Cassie Benefield's Religion Unplugged, October 27th, our only rule is as long as it's true and as long as we have evidence, we're going to do it.
Hmm.
And I'm presuming that's kind of like the ethic of the project. And there's the word
Yep.
our, so I'm thinking of it as you as well. So with this in mind, I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on the importance of truth and then its relationship beside bravery?
Hmm. That's a good question. To back up, we vet every story and every
Mm-hmm.
person that comes on this series, and so we do require documentation, witness of whatever it may be. And that's not just like, did somebody see you being hurt? That's not what a witness necessarily is, but somebody who's,
Correct.
if people have heard Dan Hollander's interview, this is like end of December. It's also circumstantial stuff, co-collaborations, micro collaborations, whatever word that she used. We are interested and fight for the truth
Mm-hmm.
above all else, because we don't want false or embellished stories. Because if it's not true and embellished, then that only hurts the people who are speaking out and the ones who would potentially speak out, as well as those whom these embellished allegations are against, which is not true,
Mm-hmm.
or at least has seeds of truth, but then is kind of expanded to create an aura of, hey, this is a lot worse than it actually was, which then degrades how bad it actually was. When
Right.
you embellish, it degrades the truth that's already within it. The bravery comes in on top of that, because you don't get to hear the truth if someone's not brave enough to tell it. If someone's not brave
Mm-hmm.
enough to say, hey, this happened to me, who I'm accusing, this is where it happened. You will hear the truth if somebody's brave enough to tell the truth, because they know almost every single person on this series, especially so the victims and the survivors themselves, they don't come on super willing to tell their story.
Of course
They say,
not.
like, I
No.
can't wait to tell tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people what happened to me, because I know that's going to get back to the people who perpetrated this against me.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking forward to when they hear from other people. It's like, oh, that's what you did to them. So they come on usually at fairly significant personal cost,
Mm.
but you don't hear the truth if somebody's not brave enough to tell it. It's not just the truth and that goes out there, because what's been said already, because a narrative that's already out there in the wild
Yeah.
before this person even speaks. And so when they're speaking, they're trying to redirect the gaze, like, don't, that's what that person's telling you is not the truth. And
Mhm.
I have to be brave enough to tell you the truth.
We're heading into, well, we're not heading into season 2. You just finished season 1, so you probably
Yeah.
want some
Yep.
downtime. But season 2, eventually, any teasers you can give? What's the angle? What you got?
Yeah, our biggest teaser, this one I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to say, is we're gonna have video podcasts on top
Cool.
of, yeah, on top of the audio. So you're not seeing the full setup right now, but we will have pretty clear video stuff. We're gonna be soundproofing. This is my bedroom slash studio. Um, so we'll be soundproofing this stuff. And so we just figured we've had enough requests of it, and I know kind of where podcasting is moving into is a little, like, YouTube is now
Little
bigger
video, yeah.
than
Yeah.
Apple, but that's kind of like the big teaser. We are broadly looking at like the marks of a safe church for season 2. Like we said all the stuff that's wrong
Mm,
with the church in season 1.
sure.
And so now we really want to focus on, if you're leaving or if you're questioning and you still want to stay in the church, what should you look for? Who should you talk to? What are the resources?
Mm.
And then we're going to get a little more pointed in our critique. And season 2 is going to be much more like, we're going to tell you exactly what we see happening, exactly the characters behind this movement, and be a lot more. I know we came out strong, but we're going to be a little stronger for season 2.
So then, before we get into Welcome to Leith, I want to let people know where you're at. But also, I know you mentioned you wanted to make sure to signal boost Outreach Idaho. What is Outreach Idaho, and where can people support there?
Yeah, Outreach Idaho is the nonprofit that we shout out during the series. It exists principally, but not primarily, to help those who are in the Pacific Northwest and Idaho and
Mm-hmm.
Washington. But it also provides resources for those who don't just live in that area and are looking for help, looking for, I need whatever, counseling, I need legal, I need something because this is happening in my church and I don't know what to do and I don't know who to talk to. They reach out to Outreach Idaho, fill in a form, and then they basically, the people who are behind that form, when the intake form gets in, help direct them to either internal resources or external resources, kind of the resources we built up through this process and those that we're connected with, and helping them kind of figure out next steps after they've come to us for help.
And then, where can people find you? Where can people find Sons of Patriarchy?
They can find Sons of Patriarchy pretty much, if you type it into Google, you will get a lot of results. We're on Apple, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, sonsofpatriarchy.com. We have an email, contact at sonsofpatriarchy.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, Patriarchy Sons, because Twitter has a 15 character limit on their tag, their
Huh.
header thing. And so I couldn't put Sons of Patriarchy because Sons of Patriarchy is 16 letters. And so I had to figure out a way to change that. So it's Patriarchy Sons on all social media.
Hey, don't forget, there's a lot of fun content missing from this episode because you're not listening on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine and support for $3 a month to gain access to uncut episodes with upwards of 40 minutes of bonus content each. You'll thank me later. Well, all right. So I had you on to talk about Welcome to Leith. When I reached out, my initial thought was listening to Sons of Patriarchy. One of the things, so the first episode of the week that you release is typically like historical, kind of more of a lecture, discussion, exploration of something. And the second episode of the week is like a testimony. And the first episode of the week, those first few episodes, I was aware of Douglas Wilson, but you helped kind of showcase that like there's a whole thing called like Kirkers, and people online will learn like, oh, they're inviting us to move in, so let's all move to Moscow, Idaho, and like we'll start owning businesses, we'll be owning places there, we'll have lists of people to be connected with that are all from, and I kept thinking like, I watched a movie like about this, like a movie that's like
Yeah.
kind of similar, where like there was this entire ideology that had this utopian fantasy of of a location that would become theirs, and it's called Welcome to Leith. And the premise is essentially a popular, so what a way to start it. A popular white supremacist named Craig Cobb learned about this town out in North Dakota called Leith. Has 24 people. That's including the adults and the kids in total. There's one business. It's basically like a restaurant bar. He saw that the properties there were dirt cheap, so he buys one for essentially $1. And he starts buying a bunch of other properties in the area. And then he goes on his white nationalist website and basically said, like a forum, and says, hey, everybody come move here. And then like, because we live here, we can vote in the city council and we can start like making rules about like, racism and awful stuff. And so the documentary is essentially about like when he moved in, and then interviews both him, the awful racist that he is, and then also the townspeople and how they're responding to this. The opening of the documentary is Craig Cobb and this other guy that basically an acolyte, Keenan Deborah. No, Deborah's his wife's name. Oh man, I had his name written down. Keenan Dutton. Walking the streets of Leith with rifles, intimidating people. And then, we jump back a couple months earlier and we see how things got to that point. I think I'll more or less leave the description of the film there. First out, though, before getting into the, what did we think of the movie, I wanted to first see, like, when I reached out and initially said, like, I feel like there's some similarities here. I want to see
Yep.
if, like, you actually agree with that. Do you think, like, after having seen the film, am I off base and we're just doing this because it's interesting, or did you feel like as you're watching this you're like, why are some of the same tactics that are in this film also present in Moscow, Idaho? I don't know. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I'll let you go. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. I think it's the similarities are moving into a small town for roughly political purposes and taking over political seats or influencing political
Mm,
events. And yeah, there's a main dude who happens to be in the Wilson story, happens to be Doug's dad. Jim Wilson kind of started all this in the 70s, and then Doug takes it over in late 70s, early 80s. So
mm,
there's similar. It's small enough town to where bigger group of people can start influencing events and can start moving towards a certain utopia of sorts, or this is what we want to have
sure.
here. And it's a little less overt in the Moscow one than it is in Welcome to Leith, where
I'll
that's
say,
their
yeah.
that's their that's their purpose. And it's a lot quicker in Welcome to Leith. It's both less overt and quicker in Welcome to Leith than it is in Moscow, Idaho, where Moscow, it's, you can say it's, they're not thinking this is going to happen anytime soon. This is decades, generations
Yes.
into the future, which is another different. But there's similarity in this. Moscow, Idaho was chosen specifically because it was a small city that also happened to have a college town in the area of the University of Idaho. So there's small enough to kind of like take over, but also has a footprint to be a little bit bigger because of the resources that are available in the city, which is a
Mm,
little different than Leith, with nothing in this area. But
yeah.
there's similarities and differences for sure.
All right, glad to know that my initial thought wasn't just like
Yeah, none of
the
the
thoughts
none
of
of
a
the movies that
madman.
I sent over to you have anything to do with Moscow, Idaho, with the exception of a few, not a few, like a kind of an underlying theme in Barbie of the
Sure.
patriarchy.
Yeah, I hear Douglas Wilson's a big fan of horses, so I guess that makes
That's
sense.
right.
um,
Yeah,
but yeah, let's kick things off. What did you think of this movie you'd never heard of? What did you think of Welcome to Leith?
I think what Welcome to Leith presents is what people think Moscow is. That it's this militia who's come in to take over. Because I don't think they've even won a political election yet. I don't think.
But they have cultural control. It's my presumption.
They have cultural control outside of Moscow, not inside of Moscow.
Fascinating.
Moscow itself is very blue and liberal and progressive. Like it was on my mind. Like, what am I going to find that's different and the same in this? But the thing that I thought through the entire time is I think what people think of Leith or this movie, I think they're going to think, oh, this is what's happened in Moscow itself, where it's just not quite that overt or intentional on the front end, if that makes sense. It was an interesting movie. Those are some of the initial and there are some differences with the lead character than there are, because there's also not the lead character in Welcome to Leith is also slightly different than how it's presented in Moscow, because Moscow
1000%.
it would have been truer of Jim, I guess, is what I'm trying to. It like the leader reminded me more of Jim Wilson, the guy who precedes Doug, than it does Doug himself, which was not the disconnect, but I saw, and people just don't know as much about Doug's father as they do about Doug, but there was a lot more parallels with Jim than there was with Doug.
Yeah, just to like even give context on Craig Cobb, the way he's introduced in the film is he moves into the property. Leith is a small enough town that like when they have visitors or even new residents, they're like
Yep.
genuinely excited. They're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, this
it's
is
the
great!
same
Like we have
as Moscow. Yep.
yeah, they're like a new face. This is great."
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and so they like greet him. They visit his house to say hey.
Yep.
And so there is an initial offering of relationship and
Yep.
kindness given to this man. And then fairly swiftly, Craig Cobb starts putting like Nazi flags on his front window and like pictures of silhouetted pictures of pregnant women and like some sort of like weird symbol implying like birtherism, and then like someone from his forum like shows up and they're putting flags of like basically white primarily nations that this is what they described, even ones that like have gone away because they're putting it up in solidarity. I guess it makes someone happy. And like it's just very
Yeah.
clear that the pivot between like people being comfortable inviting this new person they don't know anything about, and then Craig Cobb now signaling exactly the character he is. Yeah, 100%. Like whenever even listening to things like Douglas Wilson's show, which is criminally difficult to listen to, like
Yeah.
you don't get the vibe that he's mask off like Craig Cobb is, where like he's definitely mask off.
In some way, and that's the difficulty in describing some of the parallels. In some
Mm-hmm.
ways you do, and in some ways you don't, where publicly they would not do the same things as Chris Cobb would do, but in literature, in curriculum, in the stuff that's like not hidden but less public in view, they wouldn't be quite as overt with the Nazi symbols and the birthing things or the silhouettes. But the things that they do say, like they have their logical end towards that, which is you're seeing that like now with Nazi salutes
Yes.
that are like, oh, that was an actual Nazi salute. I was like, well, it's basically was.
Just like that one interview that was going around. All right, do it. It wasn't a Nazi salute. Do it right now. Do it on camera. And then no one's doing it because they
Yeah.
know exactly what it is. Like, come on,
Yeah,
guys.
it's I guess you would say what Chris Cobb is doing and what he eventually starts practicing and putting up and starts trying to influence, that is the logical end of Moscow, Idaho. They're smarter and wait a little longer than he does.
Yeah, even as you were describing it, like what takes place in Welcome to Leith is less than a year. And
Yep.
it goes from like the initial problem, the self, like
Yep.
the
Which I think that's like
fear.
the movie is the public perception of Moscow, but not actually how quickly Moscow wants to do things, nor as overtly as Moscow wants to do things. And there's also a little bit of shared capital between where Welcome to Leith happens and also Moscow, Idaho. Even like the physical location in North Dakota. There's a lot of parallel with even the physical location itself, kind of out in the boondocks, which was even Moscow. Moscow itself is not bigger, but the surrounding cities are a little bit bigger because it's close-ish to Spokane. It's close-ish to Pullman, which are both significantly larger than Moscow itself, which is why they didn't go to those two places. They went to Moscow because it was smaller and a little bit more out of
Yeah.
reach.
The movie, I remember seeing it as a suggest. So there's a YouTuber that I like watching, and he does these things that are called like a full year list. Basically, he tries to watch roughly every movie from that year. I mean, this is somebody who's paid by you through YouTube,
Yeah.
not by YouTube, through YouTube. So that's why he has
Yeah.
the ability to do that. And he, of course, has standards where like if a movie's not interesting, he'll just turn it off and go to the next one. And he has an honorable mentions section, and this was one of those films that was on it. He was just like, when I watched it for the 2015 list, like it didn't make my top 10, but it was so interesting to me. And in that suggestion, I was like, okay, yeah, barely 90 minutes. I'll watch that. And it was just like, and I remember watching, I think 2016 or 17. It was definitely early in my marriage. And it was just a very weird and kind of freaky tale of just how destructive a single person can be, and how like everything can kind of be different even though nothing has like changed in this town, like setting wise. There's just something so awful about the fact too that it's like this small town that very comfortably stayed to itself and seemed quite complacent with that, being so upended by someone who just had a computer and noticed like, oh, I can buy this house for $1. And I just find that extremely disturbing, because the film goes from like, yeah, they're openly comfortable and willing to get to know this guy, to borderline just trauma at the end, where they're just like worried that this man will come back, or worried what could happen next now that we're put on the map for this reason. And it's not even a matter of them being naive. It's just like, why would you be worried about a problem that ostensibly would never happen to you until something like this? So I guess I'm curious with that is like, like trauma is the big thing
Yep.
that I took away from this film, and that's what it really evoked in me with me a lot. It's definitely an underlying kind of textbook theme of the film. I don't know if you had seen that too as the film was developing, and then like thinking of like this film, and then even your own show, what you're doing, like trauma being inherent to it. Like,
Yeah.
how do you process that?
Yeah. I'm trying to think through how this would parallel with, and even the citizens who've lived in Moscow and how they have reacted, because they never quite, and I know this is really general, they never really quite saw it as a threat that the citizens in Leith did. It was more like, he's super fringe. This, I'm talking about Moscow. He's super fringe. This is never going to happen. I think they think it's. I think they've always thought this will never be big. This, he will
Mm,
always
hmm.
stay in his little silo. Maybe he'll have wacko Nazi sympathizers around him, or birthers, or quiverful families, not too terribly different than what you have in Welcome to Leith. But it's like, if we keep him in this corner, then he won't grow very much, which is what has led to Wilson growing, versus what you see a little bit more in Leith, where I think they take him more seriously in Welcome to Leith than they do in Moscow. And I know that's like a really, really broad brush, but there's more fear, I think, in the movie than there is in Moscow itself. And maybe that fear is happening a little bit now because they see the social and political power this movement has. And I think that's starting to creep in now versus it didn't before when he first got there.
I wonder if it's the ideology of like Nazism and like these awful things that Craig Cobb believes and his crew are inherently like anti-life. like they literally dehumanize anyone who isn't white or on their side. And Craig Cobb makes jokes about like killing people,
Yeah.
as do the other guys. And then obviously the Nazi symbol is hateful to the point of death. So like
Mm-hmm.
there is a threat of violence that is fatal in the presence of what they're doing. Whereas like the ideology of like Douglas and Moscow isn't really fatal. It's a lot more akin to like, instead of dropping like a lobster into a boiling pot, it's more like a frog in a simmering pot that
Yeah.
starts to boil, where like by the time you realize it was threatening, or its end results were threatening, like you don't have time to perhaps, or perhaps the power to deal with it. And I wonder if that distinction maybe is what separates the two. But yeah, then I also just thought like this movie is an interesting showcase of how like the internet can produce dangerous monocultures.
Yeah, that was going to be
I was,
my next point. It's you have Cobb on the internet now, less so present in Moscow, even though what happens in Moscow lays the fertile ground for things like this to happen.
yes, and so like I said, although anytime I just to kind of read my note, I thought of, I just thought like although at any time somebody could have picked themselves up and moved anywhere to just try and change a community if you had like enough intent and support. There's just like a new ease to doing it when you have something like the internet, which like can become this massive source of information, influence, and support that is just so different. And Cobb is even sharing like his plans online where it's like, I've mapped out the town. Here's what we're going to buy. And by having the map this way, we have best like support and advantage across the whole place. And then following the events of the rest of the film, it's clear that the internet continues to be this incidental
Yep.
instigator for all these hateful things. And I say incidental because it's not, the internet is a tool. Now the medium is the message. And
Yep.
part of what the internet's doing is not exactly healthy, but it is being used so maliciously. And like, I obviously feel like I could explore the idea more, but I was just curious, like how much you had picked that up and like how the medium of the internet is used in this way even now.
Yeah, and that's again where I go back to the metaphor of Wilson's project in Moscow has intentionally kept the results not too dissimilar from Welcome to Leith, or at least the desires in Welcome to Leith and the insignia, has kept that more underground, even though I think it's always existed.
Totally.
But
Totally.
he
Dog whistle stuff.
what
Yeah.
he does really well is he preps the ground for others to do what Cobb did and then distance himself from them. It's like, well, I'm not as crazy as those people, even though he's just as crazy as them. And that's been fertile ground for the internet, where people can take his ideas, take his writings, take his sermons, take his whatever it is, which you're seeing in spades now with outright anti-Semitism and outright like neo-Nazism on the internet, and starting a lot of these online debates.
And in the White House.
Yeah, it's like it is out there.
Yeah.
And I think you can draw a pretty direct line to some of the work that he laid out, because he's kind of bought himself some plausible deniability, although he has said some of these things in print. And that's the glory of the internet, is some of these people who have now bought into this system, have bought into the hateful speech and whatever it may be, have looked through its resources and are making them very popular online and are building off of this stuff. And so it's both the glory of the internet, where we can find these things, but it's also horrible because now they can move a lot faster than in a single city or in a rural city or with one person. It's now you have whole hordes of these anonymous people who are now saying all this stuff that would have been siloed in a single community. They are saying it all over the place, all over the internet.
I think the last thing I have, at least for like, what do I think about the movie or what does it draw out, is it's also just important. Like, there's some good criticisms of Welcome to Leith, that
Yep.
the film is not comprehensive. It
Yeah.
is compelling, but it's not comprehensive. So, for instance, one of the citizens of Leith is black, and they only talk to him for about 5 minutes across the entire film. And the disposition of this black man is probably one of like someone who is kind of more private, probably doesn't want to be involved with the film, but the film then never says that that's what he's like, that's his intent. And so when the whole film's antagonistic force is the hatred of non-whites, I feel like you have to address the fact that the film is not inviting this black man to perhaps share more. And again, he may not have wanted to, but the film needs to then say it so that we know it was at least on their mind. And so, like, when Craig Cobb is introduced, and now it's like on everybody's mind that like this guy is an overt skinhead with a massive head of hair, like it just seems bizarre. And then the last thing I think before getting into spoilers is that the film is oddly still prescient. It is underseen. That is definitely true. It
Yep.
was a Sundance feature. It's independent. So that's usually what happens to documentaries is they just kind of vanish. But this came out like 2015. So it
Hmm.
was probably shooting 2013, 2014. And even around that time, I remember people complaining, like, oh, the civil rights already solved racism. Or look, we all have all the same rights now, so it's fine. But it's like, no, like just because you've legally
No.
solved a problem, evil still fights against
Yep.
goodness and righteousness. And now we're in 2025 and I'm rewatching this. And I even went to like Letterboxd and like people are logging it recently because it's been on their
Huh.
mind 2020 to now.
Yep.
And because it's like, oh, like this was happening 10 years ago. And yeah, it's there is like no shadow of a doubt that like this was already there, was still a problem, and part of how you preserve goodness is the continued repelling of evil.
Yep.
And like to be clear, like obviously what they're doing, what Cobb and them is not just evil civilly, but it's also evil biblically. I
Hmm.
mean, we already started with it, but like there is an inherent value to man because of the fact that they're made in the image of God. And so just by sinning does not remove that. So there is really no right for anybody to mistreat anybody
Yeah.
else. Yeah, so it's just bizarre. Enjoying this episode? Grab that share link and tell your friends. Word of mouth is the most effective way for a podcast to reach new listeners, so don't be shy. Share the episode wherever you can. In conjunction with that, I thought of a running joke that was online lately that's just like, what radicalized you? And then the caption would read something like, I lost a family member to like conspiracies and QAnon. Or, bro, have you read any Instagram comment section under a woman's post? Like, that's kind of the mentality of
Yeah.
like how we get radicalized. And I do think it's like reductive to seriously call that radicalization, because that's not everyone's moved to acts of violence and terrorism, and that's usually where we should apply that word. But it's clear a lot of people are really fed up with attacks against what is righteous and good, even if they don't know that it's righteous, holy, good, or godly. They still see like, but there's a civil good here.
Yeah.
So my thought really, or question, Peter, was just like, this is 10 years old,
Yep.
this movie, but it feels like it could have come out yesterday.
Very, very much so. Yeah.
When it comes to the preservation of hatred, why, like, what factors are at play here? Why does it keep going on?
Yeah. And I was actually looking through how other people have engaged with it, and there is a Variety article, and so I was curious what people thought about the end of this. And since this is spoilers, right? I can talk
I
about
think
the end.
officially we can do that. I mean, it is also documentary, so it's just factual stuff, but we'll consider this the official transition into spoilers. So we'll have it more open. The documentary is good. Check it out. It's less than 90 minutes, guys. You can totally
Yeah.
finish it in one dinner. But yeah, let's do spoilers. Go ahead.
I liked what this said. If Welcome to Leith has a flaw, it's that this reality prevents any satisfying conclusion. While some justice has been served, Leith citizens are still afraid of what the future may hold, and whatever grief they've been spared might now simply be visited on some other hapless rural enclave instead. Offering big picture context are agents of the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, who keep close tabs on U.S. hate groups. They first brought Cobb's stealth plan for Leith to public attention. That is like the non-satisfying nature of the end is truer to this reality than the satisfying, hey, we kicked them out and we are free of all the Nazis and hateful people. Because yeah, this came out in 2015, and now what you're seeing in 2025 is this is spread. This is not just in one community. This is all over the place. And yeah, it's becoming as overt as it was in this documentary. While it may not have been overt in Moscow, it's flowering into its overtness now.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a couple things for the ending that I'll expand on later, because it did come out in 2013. So I was like, what's happened since then?
Yeah.
And there have been like further events that have taken place, including with Cobb, kind of softly, like still in regards somewhat terrorizing Leith. But now that we're in spoilers, like, yeah, he still goes to jail, and one of his counts is dropped because a person essentially was willing to verbally take the law into his own hands. it's a frustrating thing that like here's something that was underseen in 2015, but is also like clearly correlating the relationship between the influence of the internet, the influence of audacious men, and the ability to fully disrupt a community. Yeah, the first question for like spoilers, recurring symbols, iconography motifs, instrumentation, catchphrases. This is a documentary, so really you kind of have to read between the lines across like what the ethic of the director is trying to bring. I already sort of talked about the fact that like this is less than a year,
Yeah.
but the one thing I kind of stepped away with is it's not just that it's less than a year. It is less than a year for an entire community to go from totally okay to traumatized. So
Mhm.
like the beginning of the movie, again, as stated, they're comfortable, they're inviting him over, but then they realize like, oh, he's dangerous. And then at the end, Cobb is now out of jail, has a federal record, can't go to Leith for the period of probation, but he's already posting online again, and he's already like saying thanks to the racist supporters that he has, and he's already so on and so forth. And then we have interviews with Leith residents, and they're like, I'm terrified. Some of us are practicing with our guns because we don't know, like, are they going to come invade us again, and like, are they going to do it out of violence? Because they were put on trial for walking around with rifles and threatening neighbors. So there's just this reality of the fact that all it can take is a couple months to completely destabilize the trust amongst a community,
Yep.
and not just a community but amongst themselves and their communities, because they were inviting, and now they at least at the way the presentation of the documentary, they are probably a lot more uncomfortable with
Hmm.
foreign people coming in, not foreign races, but literally just
Yeah.
non-Leithians
Yep.
coming in. And so it can just take a ton of time for positive change to show up, but it can only take just a momentary period of sustained trauma to cause irrevocable damage.
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
Oh boy. Now we're getting into human psychology. That's I think sometimes when people look at the difference and they look at those who were in Leith and experience what they did and the trauma they come away with, because it was a little bit quicker and because it was so fast, there's an idea of like they'll get over this, that the town will move on. And I guess you can kind of compare this to when somebody goes to a church and the church gets taken over by a minister, whoever it may be, with whatever ideas that he has, and people come away traumatized from this takeover. It's no less real than those
Yeah,
who've had a long, slow drip. And in some ways, it's like there's some like more visceralness to the quickness that this happens. And I hate, like, I don't want to say like I'm comparing different trauma responses to
sure.
people, but it's when it happens quickly, it's like you didn't see it coming, you're blindsided. This is how your community's always been, and then somebody comes from the outside and then shakes everything up. It's like shaking something really, really fast and then expecting the person to be really, like, to be okay after it. And that's the things that we deal with in Sons of Patriarchy, is even if it's a single rape event, the trauma, like the body is going to respond to trauma in so many different ways. And especially when somebody comes and infiltrates into your home,
Yes,
into
totally.
into your community, into your life, this outright and this viscerally. Trauma is just trauma. People are hearing me ramble because trauma is just messy.
It's crazy. It's you figure your safe space, if your safe space is contaminated with a lack of safety,
Yeah,
rest is borderline impossible. It
yeah.
is so difficult to be able to decompress.
Because it's going to ruin shared communal spaces. It's going to ruin
Yes.
shared memories. It's going to ruin that diner that you used to go to, or the pew that you used to sit into, or the certain section of the Bible that you used to read from,
Mm-hmm.
or the place in the house that that picture was put in. It ruins that for the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do to take that back. And that sounds
Yes.
really down and dark, but it's the truth about trauma.
Yeah, it becomes something that requires extremely difficult work and exercise to change. And that's if you only really want to see it change, because maybe you could just relocate or something like that. But there are ways in which these things are much more complex, which, using the word, a lot of this approach is complex trauma, which is often described as you live in a house, you have a back door that's just a glass pane, and a tiger starts walking into the backyard. The first couple times you freak out, and then you eventually learn that that tiger is not going to come inside. And so you get used to the fact that, like, as long as I don't step outside, I'm totally safe. You move, this tiger never shows up again. You have a back door that is the exact same way. You never use the
Yep.
backyard because you're built to think, I'm safe inside. I will stay inside, and you're genuinely okay. But the second I go out that door, that's when that tiger's going to show up. And that's kind of what's cultivated in both cases of trauma, it seems, where in the case of Moscow, while listening to the show, part of the fear of church-based spaces, when you come into like mentioning terms like love bombing and trauma dumping and the kind of relationships that are cultivated there, they are all signals that then they're like the glass door. And then you get to the abusive figure that is just outside, and no one wants to step outside. And that is counter to Christianity and counter to church, in which case the church is a safe space. And then in the case of Welcome to Leith, like, this small town was safe. It was a
Yep.
place that they enjoyed being in, and by the end are now like petrified for their own lives. That one of the neighbors close to the house had his wife and kids stay with their grandparents during the period in which Cobb is there because they're just that uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Hey, listener, we've got a mailbag now. Open those show notes, scroll down a little, and you'll see a mailbag link. Press it and send us a text with a question and your first name, and we'll answer it in a future episode. So if any questions pop up while you're listening to the rest of this episode, you know what to do. We'd love to hear from you. The last thing I have, at least for this section, is there's a point when Craig Cobb he had been basically dared to do a DNA test because they're like, oh yeah, you care about the white race the most. You think everyone else is bad. You're all about racial purity. Like, all right, do a DNA test. So he goes on to like a Maury equivalent type show. They're announcing his DNA test results, and he's only something like 86% white, 14% black. And he's so embarrassed. Everyone's laughing at him. And then we get some cutaways to people who work like around Leith, because they mentioned it's like a factory town, that if you want to live in Leith, you totally could, because you could work at the factory 40 minutes away. And this black man is laughing, jokingly saying, he's black. That's so funny. And then he says the phrase, sin is great, while laughing. Now, obviously, he's not, at least as I interpret it, he's not celebrating sin as a good thing.
No.
I saw it as it is a man who is looking and saying, like, the foolishness of sin is so absurd. It is so self-defeating. It is so purposeless. It is so stupid. And there are times when characters say, like, this is a stupid ideology. It just takes a couple minutes to think about and you realize it. And the one addition to this stupidity is later in the film, Keenan is in jail, Cobb is in jail. Keenan is Deborah's husband, and Deborah is one of the other, racists. Deborah is in the car driving, and the documentarians are filming with her. So they're afraid of being run out of Leith, even though they invaded Leith. And she goes, I almost want to stay just because no one has any right, no matter who you are or what you believe in, to make you leave just because they don't like you. And of course, everybody watching the movie face palms and tears their garments and rips their hair out because they're like, did you just hear what you just said compared to all of the ideological beliefs that you guys have espoused the entire time? So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about how sin is self-defeating, that it's this Ouroboros that just completely doesn't understand that by consuming what it is consuming, it is actually self-defeating. It will never reach any goal of self-satisfaction. Apart from this obvious sin rejects God and people reject God angle, what do you think it is that's like encouraging people, whether it's to the extremism of Cobb and Keenan and Deborah, or to the subtle extremism, frankly, of Moscow? And I know it's not all Moscow. I'm just using that to summate that, like, them. What do you think it is that like preserves this just irony, this utter and complete sinful irony?
Yeah. That's a big question. It's a really big question, because it's something that it's not just something I talk about. It's something I myself deal with, the self-destruction of sin. Because even in Moscow, it's those who are like, well, those are just the weirdos, and you can't really do anything about the weirdos and the fringe people. They're just going to do their own
Mm-hmm.
thing. But then that itself is like a sin of omission versus the sin of commission. It's the sin of perpetrating the act, like Cobb and others are doing, versus those who are not like, they're not okay with it, but they're just like, well, they're just going to be here and they're going to do their own thing. And who are we to say anything about this stuff? But if you're not the one who's being hurt, or if you're not the one being hurt, if this is our rationale behind this, it just perpetuates the same thing over. And it's easy to be blind. It's easy to be comfortable.
Yeah.
It's easy to say this is not hurting me as much as somebody else it may be hurting. And this is something we deal with on the series. It's not a really big deal in my camps, and so I'm not going to do anything about this. Or it's just a few bad apples, either Cobb's a few bad apple, or Wilson's a few is a bad apple, but we're good over here. But it is a cancer that will spread, and that's a funny thing about sin. Sin is not just the things that we do, but sins are the things that we don't do. And it could be difficult to expose some of the stuff about ourselves and slightly go in a different direction. Sin in your question, the rejecting God angle, it's just sometimes easier for humans not to lose stuff. And if exposing this stuff means you have to lose
Mm-hmm.
things, it's just easier to stay comfortable. I don't know a better, more poignant way of putting it. It's American comfort, Western comfort, white comfort is a lot easier to live with than it is, I'm going to call this out, and potentially lose a lot of stuff, and potentially lose things that are near and dear to me, potentially move, potentially force somebody else to move. It's just hard to lose things in your
Mm-hmm.
own life. It's hard to upend things in your own life. But that is a sin in our own life, and the sin that we're not recognizing as the full extent of what it is. That's also pervasive in ourselves and others.
So you're seeing it as like a social thing wherein like there may be an individual who is self-deluded into it. So for instance, Craig Cobb, he believes this
Yep.
racially awful thing. And prior to Leith, because everyone in Leith basically, once they learn who he is completely in opposition to him. They are watching him to make sure he's not doing anything awful. And some of them are not nice. They graffiti property and stuff. They damage things, and that is wrong. You do not beat evil by committing acts of evil.
Yeah.
Are you saying you're approaching it kind of like prior to this, theoretically? There is a community that recognizes like, oh, like racism bad, but Craig Cobb is not bothering me. So like him do his own thing. So for instance, one scene later in the film when Craig sells his house, someone buys it and says like, yeah, I heard about what was going on, but like it wasn't really my problem. Like he just what? Like that's just how he approaches it. And you're kind of feeling like, that's not good because that probably continues the perpetuation. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, because it's sin is both very direct and obvious, but it's also, I mean, you look at Genesis 3. Sin is the serpent is very obvious in his calling out of what the tree is and is not, and what God says and does not say. But it's also super manipulative and super under the waters
Like
that
an
we're not
undercurrent. Yeah.
recognizing and realizing. And so even if it's not a direct violation of God's law, like murder or racism, I would say, I mean, anything else like this, or Nazism, the things that are under the waters that allow us to be okay with not even the status quo, but like little bits and pieces, like the person like you just said who had sold the house, little things that are not super apparent on the front end, but then also allow the thing to still fester within the
Mm-hmm.
community, or the way that it's perceived in the community, or the way that others who may be hurt in the future, it's perceived in the community, which is the same things we see in Moscow, where at least in Moscow, they're just not fighting very hard to get this out.
Mm.
They're not doing the things you saw in Leith. That they're just not, and that's also a part of what we said, the timeline of this. This has been a long, slow burn in Moscow versus very quick, which is why you see a lot more reaction in Leith than you do in Moscow, which leads to kind of lulling the people to sleep, which also has a sinful aspect to it too. So there's the self-deception, but then also the comfort that sin can bring to us, at least perceived comfort that sin can bring to us when things like
Movie that you found particularly compelling or that you wanted to talk about?
I was not expecting at least some of the birthing things on the front end, which that
Wild.
yeah, that caught me a little off guard because that is too on the nose for what we're trying to expose in Moscow, which may not like
Yes.
I'm gonna guess it like was throwaway or just like weird things, but that's exactly the stuff that we see in these communities. At least in the stuff that I've done more research into, which is not dissimilar from this, is the quiverful movement. It's you pop out kids, the kind of the trad wife stuff is maybe the closest parallel to some of the stuff that you get. It's perpetuating a little bit of like we need to build warriors, we need to build more people who can fight for the things that we want in Congress or in the Senate or in our local elections. But those are the things that look, I guess, traditional-ish on the front end. That we want to have a lot of kids, but those that's what we've seen in this movement, which is more frightening when you look into it than on the surface level. Which I don't think that would have come across immediately, but that's some of the stuff that I saw.
Yeah, it's so bizarre because it's constructed out of kind of like a usage of slavery because you're
Yep,
birthing kids for your purpose, not understanding that as they are born in the image of God, they have an inherent independence and sovereignty.
they're like used in these situations. It's
Yes.
there's a
They don't
telos.
have value.
Yeah,
There's nothing unique about your child if you give birth to a child for the sole purpose of birtherism, and that's because your ideology decided that they don't.
yeah.
So it's so dehumanizing. And then secondly,
I was just not expecting it, and I was like, "Oh, that's exactly the stuff that you see."
yes, and then it's also eugenics because it's this idea of ours is the best and we have to make sure we produce the best ones. So we have to line up our genes and this and that, whatever. So it removes any value of sex. So there is no purpose of sex. It's mechanical. These people might as well be pro like other forms of insemination
Yep.
because like why would being in love with someone is actually in the way of your mission? Of course they wouldn't say this,
They
but
would not, at least in the communities that we're looking at, they would not use like loving your wife or in this for the union of the marriage. It's you get married to have kids, and that of course that's a part of marriage, or can be part of marriage, but it's all like the marriage is kind of consequential to the building up of this community, this militia.
it's sexless.
Yeah,
It's ironically sexless. It
yeah,
has no like it is communal masturbation. You have no compassion, care, excitement, hope. Like part of if you are having sex to produce children and you're doing it like out of a compassion or love, like that is an exciting, hopeful, like
yep,
patient thing, which
yep,
is why it can be so deeply upsetting if your child doesn't come to pass. So like it is a bizarre thing to see that there is well, it's upsetting, I should say, to see that there's correlation between anything that would call itself Christian and then also be connected to stuff like this. Like it's bonkers. It
yep.
is, and it's so blatant. Like once you see it, you're like, come on, guys, like, come on. It's
Yeah, and
just like,
there's sort
uh,
of like sometimes it's cloaked under tradition, or this is how it's always been done. Again, in the movements that we're profiling, this is like the 1950s nuclear family. But then when you look at cults, this is like this is fundamentals 101 to looking at other places. If you look at David Koresh in Waco in the
oh yeah,
1990s,
yep,
I'm trying to think of, that's the first one that came off the top of my head. But if all of these have the same thing, it's you got to pop out kids as fast as you possibly can and as many as you possibly can, because we are trying to build something here that's going to take over the city, this country, this nation, this world. Like this is fundamental to building
so
building a cult.
stupid. And it's like, do you guys understand how long 18 years is? like,
Yeah.
like every 7 years, I feel like I'm a new person. And I think biologically that's just true regarding how
Yep.
my cells divide. So like,
Exactly. Yep.
it's just like, I don't understand how you can be like, yeah, 18 years from now, we're going to all be in the same fandom, guys. Like, what? Like, come on. Like, this is ridiculous. All right. So let's get into the ending, and then we'll get into our recommendations. So the ending of the film, just to wrap it up. So Craig Cobb and Keenan, they are being harassed, and like it's actually not good. You defeat evil by compassion and love, and then the government having the sword. If things reach a certain point, that's when the government can defeat evil through forms of force. So it is not good that they are having their property defaced, that their cars are getting scratched and painted on, whatever. They are instigating it, but that doesn't make it right. That's important to make clear. So, but in response to this, Cobb and Keenan grab rifles. They're basically like hunting rifles and patrol the neighborhood. People call the police. The police come over. Since it was an act of terrorism, they interpret it as an act of terrorism. So they end up going to jail for a time. And then during the trial, they have 7 counts against them. However, one man who was independently doing research on Cobb and all of them, there is an interaction that he has with a lawyer, and the lawyer is asking everybody, like, are you scared of them? And the purpose of that is to get evidence that they are terrorizing this town. And the man says he is not scared of them. And then he says, but if I'm on the stand, I will say it, which immediately adds doubt to the case. That one count is dropped, and that diminishes that if all the other counts go forward, it can diminish the consequences of it. So Cobb does not end up going to jail for a long period of time. He ends up actually being on probation for 4 years, cannot have any interaction with people at Leith, and then also has to have like some kind of like, I think, collar on his leg so people know where he is. But essentially, when he gets out of jail, he basically is just immediately on the internet and interacting with people. We have a scene of him having phone calls with like other white nationalist psychopaths and saying like, thank you so much for supporting me, I can't wait to get back to work. And then he's making jokes about how nobody's going to be happy that he's already back to what he's already doing. And then we're getting shots of people in Leith who are like, their entire lives have been changed. Their entire outlook of safety has been completely altered. People are buying guns for each other because they're afraid of being attacked by other people who walked around with guns. And so there is just a lot of fear present. But this was all in 2013. So I did some reading, and I wanted to just know like what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
Not a whole lot reported, but these are all things that were a mix of like, you can find it on the Wikipedia page for Leith and then also around across websites. 2014, Cobb is quoted saying retires from white nationalism as he's leaving his stay in prison. Obviously, this is untrue because he then posts hundreds of times on a website called whitenation.com. So that's not true. 2017, Cobb purchased an old church that is about 3.5 hours away from Leith. He intended to remodel it into what he called the Creativity Movement Center. The Creativity Movement is an evil, false religion that believes whites are inherently and genetically more creative and superior to others, and also that one's race expresses inherent truth. And then white skin being the ultimate of those truths. The church was then burned down, and in response to this, Cobb threatened to rebuild it, calling it the President Donald J. Trump Church of Rome, calling it beautiful, and using a moldy meme name that is given to Trump, God Emperor. If you're not familiar with those things are coming from, you were probably not on the internet at 2016. 2018 comes along. Fearing 2 new city council members may have been connected to Cobb, Leith, North Dakota, proposed by Mayor Ryan Shook a vote to dissolve the city of Leith, the town of Leith. Shook's intent is to get rid of Leith because then there could be no opportunity for white nationalists to move in, be on the city council, and have control over it. It looks like, from what I can find, the vote for dissolving Leith was delayed, and then I couldn't find any official reports after that, but I did find a post on Reddit in 2020 where someone was asking what happened. In response, there was someone who said that they were and again, if it's ever on Reddit, grain of salt, but this is the last thing I could find. Someone in the comments responded saying like they're a county native, they're close to Leith, and the vote to dissolve failed 10-7. Even so, things grew relatively kind of normal. That's at least what they said. So anyways, that's kind of the end of the tale of Leith, as far as like can be drawn from the internet as a East Coast podcaster. So Peter, reflecting on all of this, Like, how are you processing Welcome to Leith? How are you processing the idea of just people invading towns and creating utopianism, like stuff like that? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, there's a tension between kind of taking some of these things, if a potential of this seriously, and of wondering if they're just kind of hacks who are not going to get much done and they're going to get run out of town. But unfortunately, like you said, with the advent of the internet and these things, I don't think are going to be happening as much in person, at least starting in person, starting at least online, and then moving into personal or town or civil matters. But it kind of drives in taking these things seriously,
Yeah.
extraordinarily seriously, even if it's a false negative, even if it's fake, even if the person is wild and has ideas similar to this and has a small platform or it's in a small city, to take it seriously, to not just assume this is a fringe group that they have weird beliefs that were held 80 years ago and are no longer of purchase today.
Mm,
It's ideas have consequences. The internet is the beholder of all these ideas now, and
mm,
it has democratized the game. But if I've learned anything from Moscow and a little bit from Leith, it's if we allow these things to fester, even in small places, it's going to grow. It's going to continue growing. It's not going to die out, even if Cobb dies, even if Doug Wilson dies, even if they're wiped off the face of the planet. The ideas will live longer. The community glue of some of these ideas are going to continue.
mm.
It's not just assuming it'll go away or they're crazy. It's going to grow.
Hey there, listener. Want to influence the podcast? Head on over to patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine and support the show for $3 a month. In doing so, you'll be able to vote on a movie poll that picks a film we discuss each month. So jump on over there and have your voice heard. Yeah, I feel similarly that, like, God cares about nations as a people, but he
Yep.
also cares very deeply individually. And it's important to kind of see how, like, how hate and evil can be so influential and effective, because all it takes is one traumatic event to just like derail the standard passage of your life. And this is like a really intense traumatic
Mhm.
event. You have this man who is, I think in the beginning is described by the what was it called, the National Poverty Service,
Yeah. National Poverty Law Center.
and they're like, oh yeah, Cobb is like one of our top 10 like worst white nationalist influencers. And so like this guy just comes in and he's just this force of vile hatred and evil who completely destroys the lives of these other people to the point that like they're just affected. And it is poignant to think like it's a small town, so it's easy to hand wave. And what's frustrating though is you can only hand wave simple things, and this is one thing amongst many things that have happened since some orange got into office in 2016. And of course, before that, because he would not have been in office if it wasn't for a lot of this stuff. So there is like a lot of things to think about regarding the broader sense of these issues. And then also the individual, wherein you're watching people's lives just become objectively more disturbed and worse. And that is important. And it has to be regarded as important as people. And so to me, like, I think the film is most interesting as this tiny nugget of a little documentary that captures just this brief period. It's really, like, I think I described it in one of my notes. I didn't read it, but like kinetic evil. It's kinetic potential evil.
Yeah.
It is a force that is just waiting to take off. And it's really, really awful. And that's sort of what is going on when you're pointing a finger saying this is a bad thing, but people are going, what are you talking about? And I think that that's what happens with a lot of things like church abuse cases, is like it has already happened, but it's going to keep happening. And we have to stop the kinetic energy of this thing that is rolling. And yeah, like you can't all be Indiana Jones, get diving out of the way of this ball that's been
Mhm.
rolling behind you. Unfortunately, there's people that get hit.
I think 10, 15 years ago, Chris Cobb is sort of an outlier where he's so radical and so in your face that it's that somebody who's going to be this crazy is not the norm.
Right.
Where that's what we're seeing more and more today. It's like this actually gets you the social purchase, the social capital in certain groups to rise up in power or to infiltrate others or to influence others. But it's also not to say we should only be looking at people like him. It's those who are less obvious on the front end, but still have the same nefarious motives.
I mean, Keenan and Deborah, they have 2 children. And Keenan, at the end of the film, we see that they've moved out of Leith a couple miles away. And Keenan is talking about how he would love to open up a restaurant, that he loves cooking. And it's an interesting moment to like humanize him, but not in a way that, excuses him by any means, because then they have like what happens next in that interaction. But it's what evil does. It totally strips people from any potential good that they could do. That like he's stuck now, like devoting his income to hatred and evil and showcasing it publicly. And it's just a disturbing tale of a small moment in a small life that had a huge impact on all these people.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's good. People should check it out. It's underseen. I think, unfortunately, it's still very prescient, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
But it was a good documentary back when it came out then, and it's a good documentary still now. And Tubi's great. You can see basically we'll tell people where you're at again, and we'll get out of here. So what do you recommend, Peter?
All right, well, I'll go for it. I'll do one of the movies that we sort of discussed. It's sort of a mock of it, but I think Barbie has Barbie's done some really good stuff on remarking on some
movie.
of the social mores and desires, and also kind of the finitude of some of our desires, which Barbie does a really good job. I love any baseball movie, so especially with this, I like realistic baseball movies, not just ones that talk about baseball. And 42 is like my favorite realistic baseball movie, where the baseball play is closest to reality, but it's also just a really good story on Jackie Robinson. Some books too. If people want like a really deep dive into some of the stuff that we're going into in the series, read Catherine Stewart. She's one of the best. She's not known in conservative evangelical circles. She's vilified in conservative evangelical circles. But if you want to understand
another woman vilified in conservative evangelical circles,
yeah, right. Seriously, who would have known? She's phenomenal on this. One of the woman that you had on, Marissa Burt, her stuff on the family is incredible, which is why we had her on the series. And I'm just a big fan of getting outside, going outside, soaking in the sun. That's one of my recommended resources is the sun, walking outside, getting some vitamin D. And outside of that, it's caring about people, really caring about people. It's being embodied human beings. I know this is not like a physical resource or anything people can watch
good recommendation
or play, but I have a hard time with this. Maybe one, I'm going to guess people go to grocery stores. You want to go to the self-checkout line, but go to the cash register, go to the bookstore, go to a physical bookstore, go to the physical restaurant that you want to eat at and not DoorDash. Talk to people.
Save a lot of money if you do that too.
Actually, this is maybe a really good recommendation. I started doing the Book of Common Prayer for my devotions, and I started reading them out loud. So not just reading my devotions, but out loud, the prayers and the scripture portions. And it's one of my favorite parts of the day. So you can go, I use the 2019 Anglican Daily Office. That one I do the morning and evening, takes 10, 15 minutes each. And I speak it out loud to start my day and to end my day. It's free resource for anybody who wants to go to it. If you have access to the internet, there's something communal and life-giving about reading these prayers that have been read for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And also reading scripture on the same church calendar that's been out for at least 500 years, if not a little bit longer. Which is just, it's nice to know, even when your quote unquote private devotions, which have been huge in our spaces, that this is not private. This is something we do with all of God's people all over the world for ages past, and if the Lord tarries, ages future.
I'm going to recommend a film called My Scientology Movie. This is a 2015 Louis Theroux documentary exploring Scientology. The gimmick is that while Louis Theroux is investigating the cult, he's also casting for a short film where the actors will recreate various experiences shared by survivors of the cult. And so, and you kind of see like, well, why do that? Well, then they use those to then kind of like discuss the tactics and the purposes of these things. It is a tough watch, but it's extremely educational. Like, it's really interesting. And like Scientology, obviously, by a lot of Zoomers and young millennials, is so pointedly a cult. Every single one is pointing a finger at it. Like, are you kidding me, guys? Come on. But it is informative to understand those things more specifically. Occasionally, it's pretty difficult to watch, but it's still worth your time. Plus, you kind of better understand how people will utilize institutions and traditions to cede power from unwitting or people in need, unwitting individuals or people in need. And also how Scientology absolutely negs and mistreats members who leave. So very interesting, 90 minutes. And Louis Theroux, I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's a good host. So he's got so many years of things to watch, but this one's a good one. Peter Bell, thank you so much for making time to come on the show. This was really cool. I thought I thoroughly appreciate the work you're doing with the show and your team. So I really wanted to like find a way to like cross over, cross promote, all that jazz. Where can people find your show?
All right, they can find us. Oh boy, I mean, if you type in Sons of Patriarchy on any search engine, you will find loads of everything, good, bad, and ugly. So type in that, or if you want to go to sonsofpatriarchy.com, we have just a very simple landing page on sonsofpatriarchy.com. You can find us on social media, Patriarchy Sons. Type out Sons of Patriarchy in YouTube or any podcast catcher, and you'll find us as well. But as you said also too, we don't want people to stop at our podcast. We don't want people just to listen to us like, oh, that's an interesting podcast, or that's an interesting concept, or really interesting theological, historical, cultural insights. We want the podcast to do something. We want the podcast to help people, to not just inform and not just be your favorite podcast or listen to a lot. We want it to actually have an impact on the church. We want it to have an impact on individuals in the church, on those who've been hurt by the church, on those who have hurt in the name of the church. So we really, really, really want this to make an impact on the church. And so if you listen to it, our hope is it helps you do something. And that's not just to like build your own organization, but it's to talk about it. Simple thing you can do in your church is talk about it. Talk about church abuse. Talk to your pastors on church abuse, how they've handled it, if cases have come up before, all that stuff, what it looks like, because it helps others who've been hurt to feel like, oh, this conversation's going. This conversation is continuing. Maybe I can come out with my story and I will be comforted, believed, and helped.
And can one of those ways be people supporting Outreach Idaho?
Yeah, Outreach Idaho is the nonprofit that we help a lot. So they're shout out in our show notes. So if you press our episode anywhere on any podcast catcher, the very top thing in the show notes will be Outreach Idaho. And that is where survivors of various types of abuse in these churches can reach out either anonymously or with their name and say, hey, I need help in this scenario. And we have people who work behind the scenes to make sure that if you need legal help, we can provide you, maybe not free of charge, but at least provide you recommendations. And we're trying to build up the funds to where one day we can pay for legal fees. We can pay for trauma counseling. We can pay for all these other things. That's the goal of this, is not just to be a fun podcast, but for it to actually have the muscle behind it to help people who've been hurt.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Cinematic Doctrine. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. And as mentioned before, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss on the podcast. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine. A special shout out to those who support at the Art House Theater tier on Patreon. Thank you so much, Mom, Dad, Melanie, Shirleyan, and Thomas. You guys are the best, and your continued monetary support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, stay cool.